like to share with you how homeopathy can help children who've been adopted. I like to think of homeopathy as the ultimate mind-body medicine because homeopathy has the ability to release traumas so early, not only what Dr. Krebs just talked about, the trauma of birth separation, but even prenatal traumas. So for example, a child who's been adopted, when their mother was pregnant with them, she was probably going through anticipatory grieving, thinking about giving up the child. So homeopathy, I can't explain how it does it. I can tell you we have seen it happen time and again. Homeopathy has the ability to release traumas that happened before speech, before conscious mind, things that talk therapy can't really get at. So I'm here today with my colleague, Cynthia Ladigan, and Cindy's going to talk to us about a couple of adopted kids that she has treated with homeopathy. Cindy?
The two cases that I'd like to talk about today are actually an adopted brother and sister who were both adopted from overseas. And these two kids are especially interesting because in both of the cases, the element of grief was really obvious in their situations, and the remedies that were chosen were remedies that can be very helpful with grief. And so first let me talk about the boy. He was 11 years old when his mom brought him in to see me, and she was having a lot of difficulty with him because he had terrible anxiety. He was very anxious about being alone and about new situations, very afraid of new situations. He also was having a lot of difficulty, or she was having a lot of difficulty, because he was very angry. He would not express his anger at school. He would keep it all bottled in, but when he got home, he would really act out. And most of the anger was really directed at his mom. This boy had been taken care of by 5 different caretakers before he was adopted into their family. So he had quite a difficult background. And in addition to having the behavioral difficulties, he was also suffering a bit from seasonal allergies and from food sensitivities. The thing that would trigger his anger the most was injustice, unfairness. Whenever he felt something was unfair to him, he got very angry. And at school, he was always in the middle of difficulties that involved, say, a smaller kid being picked on by a larger kid, or a minority student being the victim of some type of discrimination. He would be basically fighting their battles, and his mother was concerned about that as well. There is a very clear and particular remedy that's typical for the type of person or child who is very upset by unfairness, and that remedy also happens to be very good for grief. So I recommended that to his mom, and she gave it to him, and within, I would say, just a few weeks, his behavior really evened out. He became way less anxious. His anger resolved completely at home, and in the school situations that he had been having some difficulties in, he was still becoming involved, but in a more healthy way, and his mom was very pleased about that. And in addition, his seasonal allergies that season didn't happen. He was completely relieved of that difficulty. So he went through the summer, had an excellent time, started a new middle school very successfully. Then after that, he experienced a little relapse of his previous kind of anger and his anxiety. So she brought him back to see me, and I recommended again that he take his constitutional remedy. When he did this time for about 6 weeks, at the end of that time period, he actually went to his adopted mom and expressed to her how he truly felt he missed his birth mother, even though he didn't know her. And he was able to cry and have his adopted mother hold him in her arms and resolve the whole situation. So it was really quite a beautiful experience for both of them.
That's so beautiful. And that's actually, you've given us good examples of the kinds of things homeopathy can treat so well. These things like grief and anger that honestly hard to find remedies for, medicines for in Western medicine, and homeopathy can just sort of release and resolve these feelings. And also you talked about this fighting for injustice. We don't want to totally cure that. I mean, there's a good impulse in this little boy's heart. It was just a little bit out of balance. I sense he was getting in trouble over it. And that homeopathy can often support the good qualities in the person and maybe turn down the volume a little bit so that they're doing it in an appropriate way.
Yes.
Is that safe to say about this kid? So this is actually reminding me of a little girl that I treated She had been adopted from overseas. She was 4 when I saw her, and she was 1 when she was brought to this country. She had been left on the steps of the orphanage as a newborn. She had been swaddled, I was told by the adoptive mom, swaddled and hung up like a little papoose, bottle fed 4 times a day, but not touched, no human interaction for the first month, for the first year of her life. And who knows what fright as well as grief this little girl experienced, because she would wake up every night screaming. They assumed it was from nightmares. She was too young to really explain why she was so terrified, but this was, of course, disrupting the sleep of the whole household, and obviously so painful for this little girl. So I gave her a remedy, again, very well indicated for this kind of grief, separation, fear, birth trauma, and very quickly resolved the nightmares and helped the household sleep in peace.
Yeah, fantastic. Actually, the other child who I worked with, the sister of this boy, also had problems with her sleep. She had been adopted at 6 months of age also, but she'd had 1 foster family during that 6 months, and she was very attached to them. When she first arrived in the adoptive household, she wouldn't eat for 2 weeks, and she cried the whole time. So it was really a difficult transition for her. She did make it, and then she began to become a part of the new family. The only thing that remained that her mom could still identify, even as she was a baby, was her appetite was poor. And by the time she came to me, she was 10 years old, and her mom said she was having really problems with sleeping. She was having a hard time falling asleep, mind too busy, and so forth. And sometimes she would wake up during the night crying, sometimes screaming, and it was just disrupting again the whole household. And the little girl, all she wanted was just to sleep well. So I then spoke with the mom privately. And the first thing the mom said to me was, "My daughter has a glowing personality, but she's fiercely private." And that description reminded me immediately of a homeopathic constitutional remedy, which is a mineral where 1/2 of the mineral is a descriptor of the type of person who is really private, and the other half is a descriptor for a person who is really outgoing and glowing. So I thought of that. And the side of that remedy where the person is very private is also very strongly indicated in grief. So it seemed to fit the little girl's picture very well in terms of her emotions. Her physical health was not as good as her brother's. She actually had a very serious respiratory susceptibility. She would get a cold and it would settle into her chest every year and give a lingering cough. That didn't surprise me to hear, because in traditional Chinese medicine, the lung is the place where we hold our grief in the body. And this little girl had that lingering every year. So her mom gave her the recommended remedy, and within 2 weeks, she was sleeping like a baby through the night. She fell asleep easily, and she slept through the night very easily. So it resolved very quickly. A really interesting and wonderful part of this story, though, is that the little girl also had some problems with hearing or with processing language. She had some difficulties with answering questions or taking directions at school, for which she had an IEP and some special education sessions on a weekly basis that were trying to address that issue. When she went back to school that fall, after having taken this remedy, after 6 weeks, she was taken off that plan because it was completely relieved. And it could be that the sleep really fixed that, but this particular remedy also has that as an indication, difficulties with hearing the human voice. So it was a very interesting case, and the family were absolutely thrilled with the way these 2 kids just blossomed after homeopathic care.
Isn't that great? And you've actually given us a great example. When you talk about a child in grief becoming fiercely private, it's like what Dr. Krebs was just saying about separation distress. The initial phase, this panic cry, but then the second phase, this sort of withdrawal, shutting down, isolating, being very difficult, emotionally difficult to contact for the parents, which is so painful for adoptive parents who've longed for these children and gone to such great lengths to provide a loving home for these children, and then to have the children withdraw into their grief. And that's something, as you said, homeopathy can relieve so beautifully. Treating your adoptive child for separation distress, prenatal grief, not the kind of thing you can do yourself. So please, try to find a well-trained professional homeopath. Probably the best way is simply to ask at your local independent health food store. They probably know who's in the neighborhood who's good. You want to find someone who relates well to kids.